Welcome to the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast, where we explore the transformative power of inclusivity and the strength found in vulnerability. I'm your host, Lindsay Mazza, and with each episode, together we will go on a journey of reconnecting with all parts of ourselves to foster healing and inspire a more inclusive and compassionate world for all. So grab your headphones and settle in for soul-fulfilling discussions that will make you laugh, provoke thought, and be the catalyst for growth. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. Today, we have Ali Stone as our special guest. Ali is the founder of The Inspired Leader, and she's on a mission to bring humanity back to the heart of business. Through her executive coaching, keynote speaking, and workshop facilitation, she's empowering individuals and organizations to embrace authentic leadership and unlock their untapped potential. Welcome, Ali.
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you today.
Yes, me too. It's going to be good. I know it.
Yeah, for sure. When I met you, I was like, oh, I feel like we're going to be friends, fast friends. So I'm pretty sure we'll have lots to talk about today.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled to have you, and I just want to dive in, and I was hoping we could start with you telling us about sort of your entrepreneurial path and where that all began for you.
Sure. It's been a journey. I'll just start by saying that. So I became an entrepreneur when I was 22 years old. So I mean, like it's kind of all I've really known in my life, which is interesting. I'm not sure if I thought it was the path that I would have taken. So it's been quite the journey for me. So I got involved at 22 years old in a restaurant franchise in Western Canada called Original Joe's. I know you're out east in Toronto, and their sister concept is State and Maine. So some of those concepts are now out there, but this was the very early days, and Original Joe's in Western Canada was very small. I think there was only two or three locations at the time when we got involved. By the time a decade had passed, they had 98 locations. We had 17 in our group under our belt, and it was just like this wild journey of explosive growth through this franchise. And so it was an incredible journey because I learned so much about business so fast. There was no time. My husband, I'll tell you a little bit about my husband in a sec, but my husband, Chris, and I used to always joke and say, who's going to go to school? Somebody's got to get the MBA. Like, what are we doing? But there was no time, right? Like, there was just no time for that. And so, going from this kind of like single unit way of doing business into this multi-unit way of doing business and building this large organization, it required all of these different shifts in thinking for us. And so leadership development became really important to me. I became really passionate about that. And as the organization grew and evolved, I moved more into a role that was leadership development and culture. And that was really what I saw in the organization. And my husband was director of operations, so really boots on the ground. We had this like really beautiful thing together. It was really special. Lots of people were like, how did you work with your partner? And I was like, we actually really like it. Now, we definitely yelled at each other across the dinner table sometimes. That was a real thing. But we also just had so much respect for each other and what we were doing. And we were so aligned, right, in our visions of where we wanted to take the company. So it was incredible. And if you would have, asked me if I would have ever left the restaurants, back then I would have been like, no way. Like, I love this. I'm totally aligned. This is where I want to be. But there was a major life change coming our way. And so it was 2018. So over the years, as we kind of grew into these restaurants, one of the things my husband started doing was he became a competitive marathon runner, and like very competitive, like almost Olympic time running these marathons. So training in 2018 for a sub 2:30 marathon in Tokyo. And so basically it's like sprinting an entire marathon. Like, it's nothing even in my brain capacity to imagine that I could ever do, right? Like, it's just like wild to watch him do these things. And so we had traveled all over the world. We had these really incredible experiences. I was at the finish line of Boston like 6 times, like just incredible. Like, we were having such a cool journey together doing this. So we go to Tokyo in 2018, and, a kind of long story short, I wake up the night after the marathon, and my husband is basically in a coma in the bed beside me. He is freezing cold, soaking wet, and like unresponsive. And so terrifying.
Of course.
irregardless, no matter where you are. I'm in a country where I don't speak the language, and just this whole journey starts. And by the time I get him to a hospital, he's conscious, which is a good thing. But neurologically, he never fully recovered. So nobody knows exactly what happened to him
Wow.
night in Tokyo. They call it a functional neurological disorder now, or a brain injury. And
Okay.
basically, he has no memory. So he has no short-term memory and a pretty spotty long-term memory. And so changed everything, like
Oh my
in a
gosh.
moment. So
Yeah.
really interesting when you think about it, because I can reflect on it a different way now because I'm like 6 years out of it. But
Yeah.
uh, 38 years old, prime of your life, running these marathons in like 2 hours and 30 minutes, and then like boom, everything changes. Like it's such an important reminder for me every day in the way that I live my life now that, you know, we just never know, right? And so to be grateful for what we have and the way that we look at the world, I think is just such an important piece. But anyway, I
Yeah.
digress. Shifted my perspective, right?
Yeah. I can imagine.
And so that was a real journey, right? Like he wasn't able to go back to work. And I went back, I stayed home and took care of him for about 3 months. And then when I finally went back to work and got back to taking care of our team and our organization, I just kind of like absorbed his role because we were like, oh, maybe he'll come back one day, right? Maybe this is just a thing and this will pass. And it was a big mistake on my part. And it ended up overwhelming me to the point of me then having a nervous system breakdown and not being able to
Wow.
handle everything that had happened in my life too. And so, yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of interesting reflections for me from that time. And that was kind of the precipice that shifted the way I saw the world, maybe shifted what I valued, and had me like start looking at life and entrepreneurialism and my career from a different perspective. So maybe I'll pause there because it kind of shifts journey there and you can ask me questions if you have them. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was quite the journey. And to build an organization of that size, like 550 team members, and to just lose one of the owners like that. We were so connected with our people. It was such a big loss for everybody, not just like Chris and I, right? So it was this really intense moment in our lives for sure.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing. And I think that there's so much to dissect from that, right? I think like one of the things that immediately came to mind for me is this notion of when we suffer a loss like that, and what follows the loss is this grieving process. And society just expects you to go back to the life you led before the loss. And it's not possible because you're a totally different person.
I fought that and I wrestled with it because
Yes.
I really did think the societal beliefs were supposed to be the way. And I was like, why do I feel different? Why do I not like what
Yeah.
I'm doing anymore? Why do I feel like I'm like crawling out of my skin? And it was because I was so misaligned with the new person
Yeah.
I had become. And that takes some reckoning, right? It takes some courage to
Yeah.
sit down and really be like, oh my gosh, like we built this organization and now I don't know if it's for me. And then what do you do
Yeah.
with that? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people, because in my decision to leave law, a lot of people have said to me, but you worked so hard to achieve that goal, and you spent all that money to get a law degree, and doesn't it feel like, like you're walking away from it and it was a waste? And I suppose you could live in that, right? And I think that that's the thought process that keeps people stuck where they are, because they feel like walking away from this goal that they've worked so hard to achieve is a form of failure, like almost like you're giving up on that goal that you once was like top of mind. But I really think that staying in a place that feels so misaligned is actually the failure.
Yeah. Wow. Like that's really powerful what you just said. It's so true. And so many of us will stay in that place because that's what we think we should do. That's how we think it should be, right? And it's only through this process of becoming aware of how we're feeling and having the courage to really do that self discovery, to do that deep digging, do we really start to uncover who we've become. I talk a lot about with leaders about this all the time now, especially in a post-pandemic world, right? This is such a common conversation because we all changed on a profoundly deep level, to which level you're willing to admit that, but we all changed, right? And
100%.
I talk about how, like, we have things we value in our lives and things that are important to us, and we often think those values are for life. And I actually don't believe that that's true from the experiences that I've been through and that I've seen other leaders do. I actually think our values might shift slightly throughout our lives based on the
Yes.
experiences that we have. But also with that, our calling or our purpose or where we find meaning in life is going to go through evolution after evolution and after evolution. And if we lean into that, we don't resist it when it comes. Like when it was time for me to move, I was like, no, oh my gosh, I can't leave these restaurants, right? And I resisted it hard, and I was there way longer than I should have been because I didn't know how to handle it. And now I think, like, if things are changing, things are evolving, things are shifting, I'm going to kind of go with the flow. I'm going to see what the
It's
world
so
presents to
important.
me and see what shows up, right?
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
that's really hard to do because that requires a level of, well, I mean, we could talk about so many things, but like the universal laws, right? That it requires you to trust the process and understand that there's life has its natural ebbs and flows. And the harder, I mean, the reality is the universe won't really let you resist in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah.
Right, like people, like, you will crash, like you said, you were resisting it, and then it's like, nope, we're going to make you so uncomfortable, it's going to impact your health, that you're going to have to face it, right? So that you could move on to this chapter where you're inspiring people in a different way.
Yeah. And I think you said something important earlier too about like this idea of when you were saying people were saying to you, you put all this time and this money into what you did, into your law degree and going after this. I don't think we leave any of it behind. I think
I
we
know.
pack it all up into a nice little box and we take it with us. And when you think that way, it's really empowering. So I actually don't even see it as starting over. I see it as like starting new, adding on more
Yeah.
building blocks, right? Instead of like, it's not a ground zero. You have all this life experience, like what you're doing now, all of your life experience is bringing that with it, right? And it's going
Yes.
to inform how you show up in a really powerful way. So those things don't disappear. It's just part of our life experience. And I think that's a really beautiful way of looking at things too.
Yeah, and I think the the cool thing about that, what you just said, is because I certainly believe that we don't have control over most things. But what I do think we have control over is we get to choose the things that we've learned to take with us, right, on the next journey. So those skills that you've acquired, all of the successes and failures now make you more equipped to tackle this new chapter. And right, and that, I think it's really cool because you've acquired and you've cultivated this very specific toolkit for you based on your unique journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really helps you, if you can lean into that, it really helps you in the second part of your journey or the third part or the fourth part, right?
Right.
But it comes back to what you were talking about trusting, right? And trusting
Yeah.
is so hard for us to do. It's so
Yeah.
hard.
So
Yeah.
what did that look like for you, Allie? So before this, I mean, objectively looking inward, you manifested a wicked life before this sort of
Mhm.
this pivotal point in your life. At 22 years old, you built an empire with your husband. Were you spiritually inclined during that process? Was it something you passively were into? Were you actively? I'd love to know what that looked like at that young age for you.
Yeah, no, I think I was just blindly floundering around.
Probably
No,
not, though. You were definitely following some intuition. It didn't just happen.
right? Right?
Yes.
And I look back on it now and I'm like, holy smokes. And I even think what's happened with the Inspired Leader in 4 years, it's insane what has
Yeah.
happened. And but then I get in my head about these things. And so was I spiritually inclined? No, that didn't start until like my like early to mid 30s. I started to get curious about the universe, the universal
Yeah.
laws, quantum physics, the fifth dimension, like all of these like interesting things.
Yeah.
And really just starting to like lean into what actually happened for me was I really started leaning into the practice of gratitude. And when I did
Yes.
that, I found everything shifted in my life. Like even if things were hard, it was so much better when I could be in a grateful place. And I could be in a grateful place for like, my water bottle, like the stupidest thing, right? And I have these experiences. I recently just went to like a week-long meditation retreat, and there was a lot of people in this room that were actually quite ill. They came for a bunch of different reasons, and meditation has been known to put your body back into homeostasis, and it's looking for
Yeah.
ways, right? And I sat there in this one meditation, and I thought, oh my God, I am so grateful that I am healthy, that I'm well, that I get to be here. And I was actually like welling up with
Yeah.
tears. And I actually feel that often in my life. I say I live this
Yeah.
really odd and inspired life. And that's why I named my company The
Yeah.
Inspired Leader.
Yeah.
But I just hope that I know for me it works. And I hope that in sharing that with other leaders and people, that it helps them, navigate their journeys in a bit of a different way. So I kind of
Yeah.
went sidebar on that question, but
No, that's beautiful insight because we hear this all day long, right? Like living from a place of gratitude is it's a hot button topic. You hear that everywhere, but I don't think that I think most people don't quite understand what that means because it's more than just, flippantly saying, "Oh, I'm grateful for the roof over my head." It's actually connecting with your body in that moment of gratitude and feeling the feeling, right? And you need to feel it from your heart center. And it's when you are feeling it from your heart center and living from your heart center that you shift into that magnetic energy, which allows you to manifest, right? Yes.
yeah. And so somehow I subconsciously, unconsciously knew this.
Yes.
I think I was always really grateful. I didn't come from a lot growing up. I struggled. I had my story. Like I have all the things like everybody else. And I remember coming out of high school and kind of becoming an adult. I was a little
Mm-hmm.
bit bitter about it. I was a little bit bitter that other people had things that I didn't, and I was on kind of on this path that wasn't going to take me into a good place. And then I met my husband, Chris, and he was like, people make the world beautiful, the sign behind me. So this is like become our motto in our life.
I
But
love
like,
that.
and he was like, people are inherently good. You need to believe this. And I know there's bad people out there, but like, and we used to sit around and have conversations about these things till like 2 a.m. in bed. And he just like helped me shift my perspective. And so I was like being guided to this life for
Mm.
a really long time. And so after Chris got sick and I had that breakdown, I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, if I don't figure out how to take care of myself right now, I'm definitely not going to be able to take care of him. I'm not going to be able to run
Mm.
this company. I'm not going to create the life for us that I dream of, right? And so it was really interesting because I remember like it was a very emotional moment and I had this like massive breakdown and
Yeah.
went to my sister's house. I was like, go to your house, like, she's like, okay. Right. And so I'm in her basement. I'm all wrapped up in blankets and having an emotional breakdown. And I remember sitting up and being, when you're just so exhausted, right? Like
Yes.
it's like the big grief, right? And I was like, I remember sitting there and like closing my eyes and taking a breath and like instantly feeling a little bit better, like a deep breath and thinking, oh my God, like I don't think you've breathed in 4 months.
Yes. Oh, I
And
have
so
goosebumps. I have
it was crazy. And people
because
are like,
because what you did was, and this is what I say to people all the time, is you also hear that you just need to surrender to the universe, but it is so hard to surrender when you've been living from a very masculine energy of I have to do to bring success to myself. But it's those rock bottom moments where you're curled up in a blanket and you are so exhausted that you have no option but to surrender. And that's what you did in that moment.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so out of that moment, I was reminded of the power of breathing, of
Yes.
slowing down, of coming back to the present. And so for a couple of years before that, I'd been really dabbling into meditation. Uh, Again, very flippantly, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. And but now I was like, oh my God, this has actually become really important in my life. And something in me was like, this is going to save you. And so I went and I actually became a meditation teacher. So I took a 50-hour program. It was amazing. It was really spiritual, a lot built in like the Vedic
Yeah.
texts. The teacher had trained with Chopra. So, like, this really cool program. And I got out of it and I was like, that was really good. And I love the spiritual piece, but I was like, I need some science too, because I know there's a lot behind this. And I just want to understand the full scope. And so that was when heart math dropped in my life. And it was like you got to experience some of it, but it was like this experience, this practice of, like you said, connecting with our heart center, connecting with that energy. It's not meditation. It's much more like mindfulness. Like, you can do it now in the moment, anywhere you are, and bring your body back into like equilibrium, back into homeostasis, and to have your heart and your mind communicate, rather than like they're often fighting each other, right? Your brain's like, no, and your heart's like, yeah,
Yeah.
and you're having this conversation all the time. And so I do a lot of that work in my life. And I think that it really helps me now. It helps me stay present. It helps me stay real. It helps me make decisions that I feel comfortable with. I still make
Yeah.
mistakes, but like, yeah. And so that's been a really big part of my evolution too. And yeah, I often say you used to hear about the CEO in the 1970s and 80s that just dropped out of a heart attack. And I
Yeah.
always remembered that. And I was always like, why? And then when I got sick like that, I was like,
Yeah.
I know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what's so cool about heart math is that, and for people who don't know, it's this scientifically backed exercise of being able to connect with your heart, right? And physically connect, like you're envisioning your own heart in your body, connecting your mind with your heart, which is so cool. And it's something, I mean, from my perspective, it's totally a form of meditation. I mean, I think that people who are less spiritually inclined find the idea of heart math more palatable, but it's something that I have always meditated in that way. So when you went through that exercise, I thought this is so interesting because it is so effective and it's not that complicated and it doesn't take people a long time. And that's the reason why I started to meditate that way, because in the height of my chaotic legal career, I would always find myself making excuses for meditation. So what I started to do is I would do those exercises when I would shower in the morning, because those are moments that you always have to yourself. And it was the few minutes that I connected, and that made the world a difference for me. Yeah, so I love that, and people need to research heart math more, because especially from a visual perspective, I think sometimes the spiritual stuff is too woo woo and not tangible for people, and that's why they can't really get into it. But yeah, the heart math piece is really interesting.
I'm also quite spiritual, but I do sometimes have to convince my logical brain why it works. And so I actually think it's
I
part of being
know.
human too. Like,
Totally.
we all kind of swing that pendulum and but sometimes your brain will come at you and be very logical. And if you're sitting in a space that's super spiritual all the time and then all of a sudden your brain starts fighting you, it's like, well, how does
Yeah.
this even work? How do I even know? Well, there is studies out there. There are things that can show you and that you can bring into your core knowledge that can
Hmm.
support you in those moments of questioning what you're doing or what is all this for. because there's challenging moments with it. Sometimes I meditate and I'm like, oh, ugh.
I know. Some are not. Sometimes you're like, I ascended to another stratosphere, and other times you're like,
Yeah.
I'm as anxious now as I was before.
I feel like, how am I even going to get through today? I don't even know.
They're never as, one is never as good as the next. It's so funny.
And I think
Yeah.
that's why people give up on it, right? But it's this constant recalibration. And we just live in a world that is like so fast paced right now, right? So I just believe that anytime we can spend in our nervous system, in our heart, in our core, even if it's 30 seconds a day, you're like giving yourself a beautiful gift, a gift of like living your life in a more aware, open, present, powerful way. You don't have to do it 24 hours a day. You just need to believe in it and do it even a little bit, and you could have a profound shift in your life.
Well, and then what you end up doing is when you start actually feeling the benefits of it, you start looking for more moments in your day to do that because it becomes your medicine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And you don't need medicine. Like
No.
you don't need, you don't need Advil, you don't need like these things. And I'm very much a proponent of Western medicine. Like if you're sick and you need a doctor, like please go to a doctor.
Yes.
But this is like the ongoing continual care that provides longevity, that alleviates some of these things down the road that we might need medical care for, right? And it's like the long term vision, which is always hard for people, right? It's like, why do you work out? Why do you work out every day? And it's like, well, because I want to be healthy when I'm old. But a lot of people don't work out every day because they're like, well, it's not doing anything for me right now, right? And meditation kind of falls into that category, I think, a lot of times for people too. So,
Yeah, totally. Because we live in an instant gratification kind of
yeah.
world. But I mean, heart math is pretty instant gratification, though, people. So you need to try it. Yeah,
And it's free. Like, oh
that's
my gosh,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So much of the instant gratification costs money.
I know. It's so true. And it's not good for you. This is good for you. Yeah. So what led you to the inspired leader? So you had this breakdown, your prior life dismantled before your eyes, and you decided to walk away. Did you walk away with a plan in mind, or what did that look like?
Well, it was a constantly evolving. So it was like kind of a plan, but it was kind of like fuzzy around the edges. Like it was like, I
Yeah.
think I know where I'm going, but I don't know if I fully know. So a couple things happened. So one thing happened that it was a business conference. They asked me to come speak. They asked me to come do a talk about culture and the organization that we have built at Joe's. This was about a year after Chris got sick. And so this was the first time I ever spoke. It was super messy. I read it all off paper. I was like, that sucked. It was terrible. But at the end of it, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. So I had
Oh,
150 CEOs in this room, and they were like, and I
yeah.
was like, and I just shared the stories of the experiences that we had had building the culture at Original Joe's. Those, 15 years in that bubble, if you will, that I was living
Yeah.
in, I didn't realize that other people didn't have that same experience of work. Like I truly loved what I did. I was aligned. I was in my purpose, but I also created that. And so I shared that with them. It took me a long time to get out of that room today. They were all like lined up and talking to me. And I remember I brought my sister for like emotional support because I was like, you're going to have to drag me out of here after they tomato me off the stage, all those things I'm saying. And she comes up to me after and she's like, do you realize what just happened? And I was like, no, I don't even know right now. Like, this is like a lot to take in. I just had so
Yeah.
many conversations with so many people looking for something better, more connected, more meaningful in their work. And these are like CEOs. These people get to create this. Like they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
And so that was the precipice. That was something that really just like kicked it off. They sent me the feedback, the organizers of the event. So they had these like feedback forms on the chairs, and everybody filled them out. And the organizer came back to me and said, you scored higher than people we paid like $20,000 to come in for. Like, there's some things you can
Wow.
work on, but what you're delivering is really impactful. And I was like, oh. So that was kind of the start of like being like, okay, well, maybe there's something else out here for me. And so I started consulting a little bit with organizations and going in and doing some leadership development, really high EI stuff. So
Yeah.
like, I'm not your time management person. I'm your,
No.
let's talk about what you value. Let's talk about what you value as a team. And then let's like really all try to understand each other so that we can connect on a real level and build a lasting high performing team. So I do some pretty
Yeah.
deep work with people. And the more I did it, the more I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. I
I
would come out in
bet.
these teams. They would be so energized, right? People would be like, you can tell I'm getting energized talking about it, but people would be
Yeah.
like, at the end, they're like, oh my gosh, I have so many ideas. And I would always get emails after. And I was like, okay, well, clearly, like, I'm good at this. Like, I should maybe think about what this looks like. And so I ended up getting my coaching certification, which was an important piece for me because there's this piece of like helping people through their challenges. And I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't directive, right? I didn't want to do it from a leadership perspective. I wanted to do it from a coaching perspective, from the perspective of of helping them see around their corners, not my perspective.
Right.
And so coaching's been a really cool thing for me because I've learned how to work with leaders and entrepreneurs and help them create their own reality through conversation. And so, yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, and it just evolved from there. I built a thriving coaching practice, started running some women's leadership and wellness events over here in Edmonton, speaking across Canada.
Love it.
Working with some speakers bureaus and just like really crazy things I would have never thought. And so now I'm doing them. And I just keep trying to be really grateful and humble and stay present every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's something you said that's so powerful is you started to do, well, what you did was you followed the breadcrumbs, right? The universe gave you these opportunities, you followed them, and then you listened to your body because you were feeling energized after these meetings. And that, from my perspective, is the indicator that you're living in alignment and you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing. We're not meant to go through the day and by the time we've had dinner be totally depleted, right? That's not how we're supposed to live every day. And if that's where things are at for people, they should reassess because that means you're not doing the thing you're meant to be doing. And it's very scary. And it was certainly scary for you. It was certainly scary for me. But I could not imagine continuing down the path that I was on.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
There comes a point where you're just like, there's no way.
No.
Like, there is no way. It was so misaligned for me. Like I was waking up every day and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go to work today. And I was like, I love these people. It's actually nothing against them. It's like all inside of me, like that it was so misaligned with who I had become. And so that was
Yeah.
a really interesting experience for me. And I see people go through it all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
people will sit in that for a long time before they make a
Yeah.
decision. And I'm always like, I'm not an advocate for you just leaving your job and not having a plan. So let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
But if it's time for a change, maybe it's time for a change. Like, don't you want to be happy in your life? Don't you want to look back on your life and be like, yeah, I'm glad I did that? Think about the adventure that brought in. Think about the joy. Think about the experience, right? Like, we miss out
Yeah.
on some of those things the longer we sit in, I call it purgatory, the
No,
longer we
and
sit there, right?
totally. And you're not serving other people the way that you need to, right? And I remember when I was working with my mentor and coming to the decision where I needed to leave law, and I had I've worked with a lot of really great people over the years. I've had great clients, and there were some clients that were like, "Oh, please just keep my file, please continue." And I really struggled with it because I had guilt. I had guilt. I felt like I was abandoning them. And my mentor said to me, Lindsay, if you have decided that this is no longer aligned for you, then it's no longer aligned for them. There is somebody else that is meant to step into their life to help them. And I needed that validation. And now I really try and move forward with that and tell other people that you're no longer part of that journey either. If your soul has already decided we're out, then you're doing everybody a benefit by following that guidance.
It's so hard to say goodbye.
I know.
I think about Winnie the Pooh, and he had a quote or something, and I don't probably get this wrong right now, Linz, but it was like, how grateful am I to feel that saying goodbye is so hard or something like that. And it's like this like
Yeah.
shift in thinking around it. Like if goodbye is hard, it means you had a good experience.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't aligned at the end and it was time to leave, like that's all good. But if it's hard to say goodbye, chances are there were some things about it that taught you some things about life, that gave you something that enhanced your life in some way, shape, or form. I mean, there's probably extreme circumstances, but generally, right?
Yeah.
And we can take that with us, right? And be grateful
Yeah.
for the experience.
Yeah. And also be prepared that that ending is going to be hard for people, and there's going to be some people that you're leaving behind who are not going to support this change, right? And they're going to get angry that you're making this decision, and that's not easy because most of us live from a people pleasing place. Nobody wants to be, at the center of drama, but you just have to be okay with all of that, right? That things have kind of run their course.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another universal law, right? Things
I
are
know.
always changing, right? And that's
Yeah.
hard for us as humans. We don't want that, but it's part of our experience and part of our growth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would be a couple pieces of advice you would give people who are thinking about making some life changes?
Stay calm.
Yes. Heart math. Heart
Yeah.
math. Yeah.
Breathe. Okay, well, some advice. I mean, definitely take your time. Like, unless you're in a really tough situation and you like just have to get out. But I think taking your time, understanding what's changed about you, because if you just jump out and don't really have a plan, you're probably going to land somewhere that's still not aligned because you're still acting from that old self. So get clear
Yes.
about what your new values are, what you feel called to do, what excites you in the world. Like do some exploring, go out, have some fun, do some vulnerable things that maybe you wouldn't have done before. Go to a rage room, I don't know. But just
Right.
do some things, right? And start to pay attention to what lights you up, to what like sparks that fire inside of you. And I think that then starts to indicate how you make that shift and what that shift looks like. I will say, I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be easy because it's going to be scary AF. You
Yeah.
and I can both attest to that.
Yes.
But when you step off the edge of the cliff, you don't fall.
Yes.
Something always catches you, and it's really beautiful. And the experience of it is unlike any experience you will have in this life, trusting yourself and your intuition.
Yes. That's so beautiful. And before we go, like, can you tell us how's your husband now? How are things with you guys? I'm sure everybody would want to know.
Yeah, it's been a journey. So I will
Yeah, I
say
bet.
that it hasn't been a perfect experience, but that's okay. He still has no memory, so we're still kind of in the same space. He hasn't been able to work since then. We've done a lot of things and tried a lot of things. We've been to the States and we've been to see different neurologists, and we just haven't really found a lot of spiritual stuff too, but we just haven't really found the answer yet. I believe that it's out there somewhere.
Yes.
I'm not giving up hope. I think hope is really important for both of us in this situation. And so, yeah, we just try to stay really present every day. And Chris has done a really good job of figuring out what his new life looks like and trying to find his new path too, which I'm right beside him and I often think, my gosh, I couldn't even imagine like what he's gone through and how he's had to recalibrate his life. So,
Yeah. Well, it
it's a
sounds like
journey.
Chris, came into your life for, I mean, obviously so many reasons, but it's really cool listening to the journey of your relationship and how he has been so critical in changing your trajectory in
Yeah.
ways that you could have never planned or imagined.
Yeah. And he's incredible to talk to. Like, just because he lost his memory, those pieces of him haven't changed. We still have these really deep conversations. And so really grateful for what we still have and roll with the changes of life, right? So
yeah. So where could people find you, Allie? How can they learn all the ways that they can work with you and benefit from your knowledge?
yeah, sure. I mean, I have a website. It's theinspiredleader.com. So pretty simple. There's lots of information on there. I'm pretty active on Instagram. So I have an inspired leader. It's like __ account. And then I have an Allie Stone __ and pretty active on LinkedIn. So, I mean, like, people can connect with me anywhere. I'm always chatting with people. Like, oh, I heard you on this podcast, or I heard you speak. So, yeah, feel free to reach out if you have a question or if there's anything I can support with.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was such a beautiful conversation. I knew it would be.
It's really great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. Feedback and episode ideas helps us reach more listeners. I would love to connect with you further. You can visit my website at lindsaymazza.com and add me on Instagram at lindsay_d_mazza. Until next time, keep sharing your stories and vulnerabilities, because one story at a time connects us all.